You're listening to The Observing Eye. Pirate radio for the mind. Coming at you fresh from the computer hell cabin.
Hello, you beautiful lot. It's Friday, the 10th of May, 2024, and you're listening to episode 64 of The Observing Eye, coming at you live from the computer hell cabin. Every week, we get psychological, philosophical, and all manner of introspective. I'm David, and this week, we're exploring the wisdom of Swiss-born British philosopher Alain de Botton. Have you ever found yourself completely frustrated by a minor inconvenience, being kept up at night worrying about what others think of you, or just felt strongly unsettled by the frantic pace of everyday life? Well, imagine if there was a book offering insights into those exact feelings, not written in some dense ancient language, but one meant for anyone to understand. That's the realm of Alain de Botton, a philosopher who set out to show us that the wisdom of centuries might hold the key to untangling our very modern problems. He's a best-selling author, a constant on literary talk shows, and the brains behind the popular School of Life project. But his appeal isn't about making you memorize names like Socrates or Nietzsche. It's about making those thinkers your allies in dealing with that difficult boss, the heartbreak that won't fade, or just finding beauty in the most ordinary places. In today's episode, we're diving into the world of Alain de Botton, the philosopher who makes old ideas feel fresh. We'll explore how he takes complex concepts and brings them down to earth, showing us how they can be applied to our everyday lives. Whether you're struggling with love, work, or just a general feeling of ennui, de Botton offers a unique perspective that can help us understand ourselves and the world around us a little better. We'll also delve into his ideas on emotional intelligence and how his work can help us navigate the complexities of our own feelings and relationships. So if you're ready to find some wisdom in the ordinary, and maybe even a bit of comfort in knowing that we're all facing similar challenges, then this episode is for you. Let's face it, life can be a bit of a roller coaster. There are moments of pure joy, but then there are those days when frustration, disappointment, or anxiety take hold. Now, you could just try to power through these, but what if there were some sources of wisdom that are meant to help us navigate these emotional storms? This is where Alain de Botton steps in. He believes that philosophy isn't just for lecture halls. It can be a toolbox to tackle our most common struggles. Now, I am quite a fan of Alain de Botton. I think his work comes across really well, and he offers some really interesting ideas and makes philosophy very relatable. Some of his work is what inspired me to do this podcast, making philosophy and psychology relatable and finding things that are actually useful. So I'm not going to lie, I'm a bit of a fan. One of the interesting things about Alain de Botton, which sets him aside from the previous philosophers that we've discussed, is that he's still very much alive and doing lectures and talks. And I've actually had the distinct pleasure of meeting him once in London when he was at an event on like mental health and well-being and that kind of stuff. So yeah, very, very interesting man, and has a lot of interesting things to say. So there's my confirmation bias for you before I talk about criticisms and critiques later on down the line. But this is, setting the scene. So he is a man who is still alive. You can still go and find his work. You can go and listen to him. I'll put some links in the show notes to some of his talks and to some of his work and his books, so you can go and have a look at those if you are so inclined. Anyway, I digress. Let's get back to talking about the man's philosophy. So one of de Botton's key concepts is what he calls philosophical consolation. Now imagine this. You're stuck in horrendous traffic. Your boss is a huge arsehole, and on top of it, you have just driven into the back of the person in front. It is enough to make anyone want to scream into a paper bag, and hope that nobody hears you. Now, in this scenario, de Botton points us towards philosophers like the Stoic Seneca. Seneca believed that much of our anger and frustration stems from mismatched expectations. He'd remind you that traffic is a part of life, that difficult people exist, and that the whole point of you running into the back of the person in front is that it's just something minor that can be dealt with. Or maybe you're dealing with a different kind of trouble, the pain of unrequited love. Love and heartbreak have been analysed, obviously, for centuries. They've been the subject of countless, infinite number of books and poems and what have you. But in the case of heartbreak, de Botton might introduce you to the slightly pessimistic philosopher Schopenhauer, who I haven't spoke of yet, but I may do in future. Schopenhauer would explain that we idealise those that we can't have, and that at its core, love is driven by our irrational desires, bound to bring suffering along with the joy. Alain de Botton doesn't treat love with the usual rose-coloured glasses in his book Essays in Love, which was the first of his books that I actually read, and it's good. It's really good. I'd recommend it. In it, he's much more like a scientist, meticulously dissecting the experience rather than a poet who waxes lyrically about the beauty of the experience. One of his big ideas in that is that we tend to fall victim to what he calls the idealization trap. Now, you know that feeling when you meet someone and your mind goes wild, painting this incredible portrait of them, even though you barely know anything about them, in fact. They could be crazy. In fact, they probably will be. But for de Botton, that's dangerous territory, setting us up for disappointment when the real person inevitably doesn't match the fantasy that we've created. Come on, we've all done it. We've all done it. That's why we're here, listening to this, isn't it? The downside to the intense rush of romantic love, well, de Botton points out that it can breed instability. 1 minute you're on cloud nine, the next you're consumed by anxiety at the slightest hint that the feeling might fade. He even looks at things like sulking, which seems far from romantic. That feeling of, I'm going to withdraw my love until you make me feel better. That hideous conditional love shit that people do. And it's just a way to regain power in a situation where your heart feels at someone else's mercy. Everybody does this because they're suffering, don't they? People behave badly because they suffer. It's that simple, isn't it, really? Then there's this concept called the Marxist moment, which I particularly love. And it's that turning point in a relationship when you realise that your feelings are returned. Suddenly there's a decision to be made. Does that mean you're actually worthy of love? Or does your partner have terrible taste for feeling the same way about you? Oh, woe is my self-worth. Now, he doesn't sugarcoat the fact that the burning passion at the start rarely lasts, but it doesn't have to mean that the relationship is doomed, of course. It's a chance, de Botton says, for something less dramatic, more enduring, knowing all the flaws and deciding to love the person anyway. It's not your typical fairy tale view of love, but it's definitely a way of looking at it by taking into account the messy psychological stuff behind it. And by understanding that messy psychological stuff, we have the word salad. We might have a better shot at navigating love rather than, fantasizing about this perfect thing that doesn't exist. As for his ideas around bringing philosophy into the mainstream, you may be thinking, what's the point in bringing my troubles to the feet of some man that's been dead for 3,000 years? Not de Botton, I'm talking about the old philosophers here, obviously. The key, and this is what I agree with entirely, is this. Philosophers normalize our struggles. This is important, so pay attention. They remind us that even across the centuries, the frustrations and heartbreaks are part of the human experience. There's something strangely comforting about realizing that our problems are not unique and that maybe some solutions, or at least ways of coping, were explored long before we existed. And now a word from our sponsor. I was thinking of trying to play some jazzy music behind, but I've run out of jazzy music that isn't going to get copyright struck on YouTube. So I'm just going to roll with it. So there's no sponsor. If you've been here before, you know that already. It's just me. And I'm going to iterate again that there will not be a sponsor at all, ever, for this. I have thought long and hard about do I monetize this? Is it even worthy of monetization? At the moment, probably not. But I have come to the decision that allowing any sort of influence externally to impact what I can put in these episodes, how I'm permitted to deliver it, and all of that stuff is going to be contradictory to the free speech and authenticity that I enjoy. So there is no sponsor. I'm not earning anything by doing this at all, and I don't care about earning anything for doing this. I'm doing this for the lulz, for the fun and the joy. But however, and don't worry, I don't want money. It's fine. What I will put out there is that if you do like what you hear and you'd like to support the podcast in any way, then all I would ask is that you give it a little like, or you follow it on whatever platform that you listen to it on. And if you're feeling really motivated, I mean, it's a beautiful day here in sunny England, and I'm feeling very hyped, you might want to drop us a review on Spotify or something. And the reason is that it gets us in front of a bigger audience, which means we can try and get these ideas out to more people. And by you liking and commenting on the episodes, it helps me to understand what you want to hear, so I can try and tailor the content a little bit, a little bit better, a little bit more bespoke for what you'd like. So yeah, that's it basically. Go give us a like or a follow if you feel so inclined. And thank you again for dropping by and having a listen and showing your support. Much love, and I'll catch you soon. Now, we all go through our days, don't we, on a familiar track. There's the work, there's the commute, there's the food shopping, picking up the children. It can all seem to blend into a routine that oftentimes feels a bit dull. But what if there's something deeper to be found, even in the most seemingly ordinary aspects of our lives? That's where Alain de Botton's work shines, taking the mundane and revealing unexpected layers of meaning. Let's talk travel for a minute. Now, most of us view vacations that's holidays for you my UK listeners. Most of us view vacations as an escape from the ordinary, the chance to finally experience something exciting and out of the norm. But in his book, The Art of Travel, de Botton argues that travel won't bring lasting happiness if we don't adjust our attitude towards the everyday. He suggests that we might even find the same kind of novelty and beauty in our own backyards if we only learn how to look. And sorry, just for the British UK guys, backyards is gardens. Now here's an example that he gives. Imagine that you are rushing through an airport, focused solely on making your connecting flight. You're infuriated by delays. The crowds are getting on your way. There's a child. You've hoofed him onto the baggage collection. Now he's going round and round on the conveyor belt, screaming for his parents. Absolute stress. Now imagine that you're stranded there by a flight cancellation. Suddenly, the same airport could become a fascinating place to observe the rituals and mini-dramas of this transitory community. People's stories are written on their luggage tags and in their hurried phone calls. The airport itself, not usually the focus, becomes a curious architectural structure worthy of attention. This isn't about pretending that inconvenience is fun. It's about a mindset shift. If we can cultivate that sense of curiosity, maybe even wonder, when faced with the expected, the ordinary becomes a potential source of delight rather than drudgery. It extends beyond travel, though. In status anxiety, de Botton unravels our obsession with social status and success. We might imagine that achieving that big promotion or buying a luxury car would be the ultimate fix for our worries, but de Botton argues that chasing an ever-shifting external chasing an ever-shifting external goalpost creates a cycle of dissatisfaction. We call that the hedonic treadmill, and I've talked about that before in previous episodes. The hedonic treadmill. Instead, he suggests appreciating the subtler things that bring genuine contentment, friendships, a satisfying meal, finding moments of calm. These aren't dependent on our job title or what others think, which for him is the key to a less frantic, more stable sense of well-being. He reminds us that some of society's most admired individuals throughout history found deep satisfaction in fairly modest circumstances. Socrates wasn't wealthy, yet his philosophical contemplations changed the world. Maybe the good life isn't purely defined by what we possess. Think of Diogenes. I keep going back to Diogenes, for example. He lived in a big fucking jar. He didn't have anything, and he was happy, waving his torch in people's faces. Then there's de Botton's... Have I hit the mic again? Wait, I'm gesticulating, I'm getting into it, I'm waving my hands around. Then there's de Botton's exploration of the architecture of happiness. We might not think twice about the design of our homes, the layout of our town, or the blandness of our office building, but de Botton argues that those environments profoundly shape our moods. Consider the difference between a bright, airy space and one that's cramped and poorly lit. He advocates for thoughtful design, not necessarily luxury, but an attention to how spaces make us feel on a fundamental level. Think of a city filled with harsh, horrible, KGB-esque modern concrete structures. Now compare that to sort of wandering down the winding cobblestone streets of a quaint historic town. Think like London versus Barcelona or Paris. London being the hideous concrete structure. Our sense of well-being isn't just about how things look, the textures, sounds, the sense of history or purposefulness in our environment. These factors play a huge subconscious role. Now, maybe you're thinking that this all sounds a little bit idealistic or even a touch privileged. But de Botton's point isn't that we should all start snapping Instagram-worthy pics of our commute. It's about becoming finely attuned to the everyday. Noticing the way the light hits a building you usually ignore, striking up a conversation with someone on your train ride, heaven forbid, or pondering the history behind the street names that you've always taken for granted. My particular favourite is Cock Street in London. It requires effort to break free from autopilot mode, but the payoff is that the ordinary becomes less so. It can become rich with subtle meanings. And that, de Botton believes, is where we uncover a more genuine and sustainable sense of contentment, nestled in the lives we're already living, not some idealized version that's always out of reach. Now, we've talked about how Alain de Botton reveals the extraordinary in the everyday, but another key theme in his writing is using philosophy to promote what we now call emotional intelligence, which is the understanding and thoughtful management of our feelings, both in ourselves and in our relationships with others. De Botton doesn't offer self-help slogans or promises that your life will change in 10 easy steps, which is part of what I like about his work. Instead, he reintroduces us to age-old philosophical ideas as surprisingly insightful tools for analysing our own emotional landscapes. Nearly did it again there. Analyzing. Now let's look at his book, Essays in Love again. I'm coming back to this because it's probably the one that I know most about. De Botton isn't giving us dating tips. He's using the experience of love and heartbreak as a window into exploring our deeper psychological patterns. We saw this in his ideas about idealization, or why we might indulge in sulking as a way to exercise power within a relationship. But we shouldn't be doing that if we're over 30, just saying. Even if you're not actively navigating romance, this analysis encourages introspection. Do I set unrealistically high expectations for those I get close to? What are my unhealthy ways of dealing with disappointment when relationships don't turn out how I imagined? He offers a similar approach when dissecting everyday anxieties or frustrations. Borrowing wisdom from Stoic philosophers like Seneca or Epictetus, de Botton reminds us of our limited power to control external events. He helps us separate what we can actually influence from the vast amount of things that just happen, whether we like it or not. This isn't about suppressing our emotions, but about focusing energy productively rather than wasting it on fretting about things that we can't change. Perhaps the most radical example of this approach is his use of the writer Proust in his work How Proust Can Change Your Life. You wouldn't necessarily think of a multi-volume literary classic as self-help, but de Botton argues that Proust's detailed observation of his own emotional states can be surprisingly useful. Here's an example. Many of us struggle with a sense of inadequacy, especially when comparing ourselves to others. De Botton points to how Proust carefully analyzes this feeling. the envy, the self-criticism, the way it twists our perception. Simply recognizing these patterns in ourselves can be a first step towards dealing with them. It allows us to say, okay, this isn't the objective truth, this is my brain playing tricks on me. Understanding ourselves is one piece of the puzzle. Philosophy, de Botton suggests, also helps us navigate the emotional complexities we encounter in others. It's tempting to get frustrated when people don't react as we expect, or when we struggle to communicate our feelings effectively. De Botton encourages a dose of philosophical generosity. Imagine that your partner or close friend always seems to get defensive at the slightest critique. It's natural to get caught up in that annoyance, but by reflecting on ideas of insecurity and the fear underlying defensiveness, maybe we gain a tiny bit of empathy that can help pave the way to less conflict and deeper understanding. This doesn't mean that we're giving bad behavior a free pass, however, but understanding that anger often masks fear, or that constant criticism could stem from unmet needs, offers a different starting point for having productive conversations grounded in a bit more compassion. Of course, sometimes philosophical reflection just makes us realize someone is truly difficult, and perhaps that it's best to maintain a distance, and there is nothing wrong with that. But even then, it's helped us to understand the situation more clearly. Alain de Botton's work isn't magic. It won't eliminate anxieties, transform difficult relationships overnight, or offer neatly packaged solutions for your emotional struggles. What it does offer is a toolkit of perspectives, some centuries old, some with a de Botton-specific contemporary spin, for chipping away at the tangle of feelings that accompany being a thinking, flawed human being in a complex world. Perhaps most importantly, his way of using philosophy leaves us feeling a little less alone in the struggle. Now, it wouldn't be fair of me to promote de Botton's work without equally looking at some criticisms and response to what he's put out into the world. And it's important to do this because we need a balanced perspective. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the criticisms of his work and some of my thoughts behind that, so that you can have a well-rounded idea of the work of Alain de Botton. Now, de Botton has found a huge audience through his accessible and thought-provoking approach to philosophy. But as his profile has grown, so have the criticisms of his work. As I said, it's valuable to consider these, as they do raise some fundamental questions about the role of philosophy in our modern lives. So we're just going to run through them, have a bit of a think and get some ideas and question, because philosophy is all about questioning, observing and taking a moment to understand. Now, one common criticism is that his style simplifies complex ideas. Traditional academics accuse him of presenting a watered-down, superficial version of philosophy designed for mass appeal. Think of it this way. If the history of philosophy were a rich, intricately woven blanket that you can throw on your bed, the critique, like grandma used to make those great big 7-foot-long blankets, imagine that's the history of philosophy. The critique is that de Botton offers us a few threads of it repackaged as an easily grasped throw pillow. Others claim that he leans too heavily on the self-help angle. Philosophy for centuries has grappled with questions of existence, morality, and knowledge itself. Does focusing it on how to deal with a difficult romantic partner, or fret less about your career, diminish the discipline somehow? Connected to this is the accusation that de Botton presents old ideas as his original discoveries. Philosophers he draws from, like Seneca or Proust, were already exploring anxiety and emotional turmoil and the human condition long before de Botton entered the scene. Does putting a modern, relatable spin on those ideas constitute valuable philosophical work? Those are weighty criticisms, but there's another side to the story. De Botton has never claimed to be revolutionizing philosophical thought itself. His goal is to bridge the chasm separating the work of great thinkers from the average person who finds those texts daunting. He'd likely agree that if you want the full experience, reading those original philosophers is invaluable. But consider the alternative. These ideas remain locked in academic circles with little relevance to how we actually live our modern lives. De Botton makes the case that, even simplified, those ideas can still be impactful. If someone struggling with anxiety finds a helpful nugget from the Stoics thanks to de Botton, is that a bad thing? even if they don't go on to study the whole works of Epictetus. He argues that applying philosophical concepts to the specific situations we face today is a valuable form of thinking. The Stoics weren't battling social media envy or navigating workplace politics exactly as they exist now. Taking those core ideas about the nature of our control or the acceptance of misfortune and making them feel fresh and relatable for a contemporary audience serves a distinct purpose. There's also the undeniable impact that his work has had. Countless listeners and readers feel seen by de Botton. The very fact that these conversations about his work happen proves that even simplified, even repackaged, these ideas spark contemplation that might not otherwise be ignited. Some may dismiss his approach as philosophy light, but that ignores the potential transformation that those first tentative sips can have on a person's life. Whether someone ultimately decides to delve deeper into philosophy or finds continued inspiration in de Botton himself, it's worth pausing. Perhaps one of the most important things his popularity reveals is a deep hunger for meaning, a desire to use our intellectual capacity to grapple with the everyday. Maybe that's not a revolution within the realm of philosophy itself, but within society as a whole, and that seems a worthy contribution. What do you think? Are de Botton's critics justified, or is his way of bringing philosophy down to earth fulfilling a real need? How essential is it that we get complex philosophical ideas in their full, unadulterated, unfiltered form? These are all important questions, and they likely don't have single, easy answers. But they're the kinds of questions that Alain de Botton wants us all to be wrestling with. Now, as we come to the end of our episode on Alain de Botton, let's just have a quick recap and talk about some of his ideas and where we've gone today. We've looked at his ideas about finding philosophical comfort, viewing the ordinary through a fresh lens, the pursuit of emotional understanding, and even the critiques that his work faces. So what does it all add up to? Alain de Botton won't hand you a blueprint for a perfect life or a 5-step plan to become effortlessly zen. No philosopher can do that, as much as the self-help industry might wish otherwise. The value of his work lies in something less concrete, but perhaps far more powerful. For one, he relentlessly challenges the modern tendency to rush through our days, seeking fulfillment in an ever-elusive future. When's the next pay rise? When's the next vacation? The next relationship milestone? The implication is that these things will be the key to lasting happiness. But de Botton keeps steering us back to the only moment that we truly have, and that's this one. He encourages us to mine what's here and now for its hidden depths. Maybe it's in the simple act of truly noticing the building you pass each day, or a thoughtful conversation with an old friend, or recognizing a common thread of anxiety in both yourself and a loved one, leading to a touch more kindness. He also makes the case that grappling with our inner selves is as intellectually rigorous and worthy as pondering the nature of the universe. Using philosophers as companions for self-exploration isn't a betrayal of their legacy, but a way of keeping their ideas alive and relevant in our constantly shifting landscape. Even if we find some of his explanations partial or don't fully buy into his style, there's no denying that Alain de Botton's work sparks introspection. And isn't that, at its core, what philosophy has always been about? Asking difficult questions, seeking deeper understanding, and recognizing that there might not always be satisfying answers immediately available. That seeking itself is the path. Maybe one of the most enduring lessons de Botton offers is this: none of us have it all figured out. Philosophers who lived centuries ago wrestled with the same fundamental uncertainties, disappointments, and the pain of love lost. In a society that worships the illusion of effortless perfection, particularly on social media, there's an odd comfort in this. He reminds us that we're part of a long line of humans all muddling through, and even the greatest minds among us were never immune to life's messier aspects. And there's another takeaway, especially when we consider the criticisms of de Botton. His success shows that outside of academic circles, There's a massive desire for meaning, for exploring the why questions behind the what of our daily experience. Regardless of whether his specific approach is for everyone, that appetite is something to celebrate. It's a sign that even in our high-tech, fast-paced existence, we long for an intellectual and emotional toolkit that extends far beyond the material. So the next time you find yourself stuck in traffic, heartbroken, or simply just a bit overwhelmed, consider picking up a book by Alain de Botton. Don't expect instant enlightenment, or that your problems will magically evaporate. But perhaps, as you read, you'll feel a little more grounded in the present, a bit more curious about the seemingly mundane, and perhaps a little more generous towards both yourself and those around you. And if his influence inspires you to delve deeper, to explore the Stoics in their original complexity, for example, or to crack open Proust, then that, in a perfect de Botton-esque way, would mean he's succeeded in his mission, even while his critics remain. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all I have to say on the subject of the modern wisdom of Alain de Botton. I want to thank you all for joining me on this journey today. As always, my 5 subscribers, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that this episode has inspired you a little bit, and it's given you some ideas, and it's made you realize that you're not alone in your struggles, that everybody is muddling through, including myself. If anything in this episode has resonated with you in any way, then I'd love to hear from you. Here comes the stock bit at the end that I just have to say. You can share your stories via Substack at theobservingeye.com or on social media. I should probably just record this and stick it on at the end. You can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/@theobservingeye and on TikTok and Instagram with the handle @theobservingeye as well. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll catch you soon.
You've been listening to The Observing Eye. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I hope it's been useful. And if you're interested in any more of my writing or work around psychology, philosophy, and general day-to-day living, please go and take a look at my Substack, which is theobservingeye.com. And that's I as in the letter, not I as in the gelatinous organ through which you see. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll catch you soon.